In the early 1940s, as World War II expanded across continents, the world's major powers raced to secure a resource far less glamorous than oil or steel, yet equally essential for survival: nitrogen. Every army relied on it to manufacture explosives: TNT, nitroglycerin, ammonium nitrate. Without nitrogen, bullets could not fire, artillery shells could not explode, and bombs could not detonate. Inside vast industrial complexes across the United States, Britain, Germany, and Japan, chemical engineers worked around the clock to produce the nitrates that fueled the machinery of war. What few realized at the time was that these same compounds created for destruction would one day feed the world. Decades earlier, scientists had already recognized the importance of nitrogen. Plants needed it to grow, but natural supplies were limited. For centuries, nations relied on scarce resources like guano deposits from distant islands or saltpeter extracted from caves. That changed in the early 1900s, when German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch developed a method to turn atmospheric, nitrogen-abundant but inaccessible into ammonia, a compound that could be used to make both fertilizers and explosives. This breakthrough, known as the Haber-Bosch process, was one of the most influential chemical inventions in history. During World War I, it kept Germany's munitions plants operating even under naval blockade. When World War II erupted 2 decades later, this same process once again became a strategic asset. Germany built massive chemical plants operated by IG Farben to supply nitrates for military purposes, while the United States expanded ammonia production through companies such as DuPont and Allied Chemical. These facilities were designed with a single goal: maximize output to meet wartime demand. Ammonia flowed into factories that manufactured explosive fillers, propellants, and industrial chemicals used across every front. War planners saw ammonia as an ingredient of destruction, not agriculture, and yet, behind the scenes, agricultural scientists were quietly paying attention. As ammonia production scaled upward, the infrastructure supporting it grew more sophisticated. High-pressure reactors, hydrogen plants, compressors, and catalytic converters equipment, originally designed for military output, multiplied across the Allied nations. Technicians gained expertise in operating these dangerous systems, while engineers learned how to control temperatures and pressures that pushed machinery to its limits. Wartime necessity accelerated innovation. Factories that took years to build in peacetime were now completed in months. The result was an industrial network capable of producing unprecedented volumes of ammonia, far beyond what war planners expected to use. A curious shift began in 1943 and 1944. Even as the war raged, agricultural economists studied the expanding ammonia industry and recognized its peacetime potential. If the enormous capacity built for explosives could be redirected, it could solve one of the oldest problems in human history: how to produce enough food for a rapidly growing population. Scientific journals and government reports quietly circulated this idea. The same chemical that powered bombs could fertilize fields. The same factories that supported armies could support farmers. By the end of the war, Allied leaders faced a crucial question: what should happen to the vast chemical complexes that had produced explosives at unprecedented scale? The answer would reshape the modern world. Instead of shutting the factories down, governments and industry made a decision that would defy history's expectations. They would convert the machinery of war into the machinery of life, and in doing so, they would inadvertently launch the greatest agricultural transformation ever recorded. During World War II, ammonia was not yet associated with agriculture in the public mind. It was a strategic material, classified alongside steel and aviation fuel. Allied and Axis war planners depended on it to manufacture ammonium nitrate, a compound that could be used to produce both explosives and propellants. In the United States, the War Production Board tracked ammonia output with the same intensity it used to monitor tank and aircraft production. Records show that American plants increased output from roughly 600,000 tons per year in the late 1930s to more than double that amount by 1945. In Germany, IG Farben's massive chemical complexes Luna, Ludwigshafen, and others did the same on the Axis side. Every nation racing to expand ammonia production had the same purpose: fuel the war effort. Inside the factories, the chemistry was precise, and unforgiving. The Haber-Bosch process required immense pressure up to 300 atmospheres and temperatures exceeding 450 grados. Engineers fed nitrogen extracted from the air and hydrogen produced from coal gasification or natural gas into reactors lined with iron-based catalysts. These reactors, towering steel cylinders, glowed with heat and vibrated with the power of the reactions inside. Wartime workers, many with minimal technical training, learned to monitor gauges, valves, and compressors as if their lives depended on it. Because they did, a malfunction could trigger catastrophic explosions, yet the demand for ammonia kept rising, and the factories never slept. The war accelerated improvements that peacetime economics would never have justified. Companies developed stronger alloys for reactors, more efficient compressors, and better catalysts that increased ammonia yield. The U.S. government funded research into alternative methods of hydrogen production, making plants faster and more reliable. German engineers experimented with advanced catalytic designs to stretch their limited resources under Allied bombing. Every innovation, every efficiency gain came from the same goal: outproduce the enemy. But in the process, the world unknowingly built a chemical infrastructure far more powerful than agriculture had ever imagined. Meanwhile, agricultural scientists within government agencies and universities watched these developments with increasing interest. Before the war, farms around the world relied mostly on natural fertilizers, compost, crop rotation, and on limited chemical fertilizers made from Chilean nitrate. These sources could not keep pace with global population growth. In countries like India and China, chronic food shortages were already common. Reports by agricultural experts warn that, without dramatic improvements in fertilizer production, widespread famine could become unavoidable. Now, suddenly, the war effort had created a solution: a massive industrial system capable of producing nitrogen fertilizer on a scale the world had never seen. Even as the fighting continued, scientists began advocating for post-war conversion. Papers published in 1943 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the British Ministry of Agriculture noted that nitrogen fertilizers could revolutionize crop yields. They emphasized that the methods used to produce ammonia for explosives could be repurposed almost immediately for farming. The only missing piece was political will. Wartime secrecy prevented public discussion. But inside government agencies, the idea gained momentum. Leaders recognized that converting ammunition plants into fertilizer plants could provide jobs, strengthen economies, and prevent food crises in the years after victory. Yet one paradox remained: ammonia was still seen primarily as a tool of war. Convincing the public and policymakers to embrace its peaceful use would require a monumental shift in perspective. Still, the seeds of the transformation had been planted. The war had created the world's largest ammonia production network. The question was no longer whether nitrogen fertilizers could change agriculture. It was whether nations would seize the opportunity once the guns fell silent. When World War II ended in 1945, nations were left with an industrial landscape unlike anything the world had ever seen. Massive chemical plants built to supply the war effort suddenly stood idle. In the United States alone, factories capable of producing hundreds of thousands of tons of ammonia each year had no further military purpose. Similarly, in Britain, Canada, and Australia, wartime nitrogen facilities faced immediate shutdown unless governments now faced a pivotal choice: dismantle these factories or convert them for civilian use. Agricultural scientists urged leaders to choose conversion. They argued that the same ammonia once used for explosives could be transformed into fertilizers to help rebuild global food supply. This urgency was not theoretical. The war had devastated agricultural regions across Europe and Asia. Fields had been bombed, irrigation systems destroyed, and millions of farmers displaced. Food shortages loomed across the continent. In 1945 and 1946, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRRA, issued dire warnings that famine could kill more people than the conflict itself. Grain harvests in Europe fell drastically, and countries like Japan and China reported critical shortfalls. Against this backdrop, the idea of converting ammonia plants for fertilizer production gained powerful momentum. Governments recognized that agriculture, not munitions, was now the front line of global recovery. industrial chemists and agricultural engineers worked together to make wartime facilities suitable for peacetime production. The conversion was surprisingly efficient. Ammonia plants needed little modification to switch from producing explosive-grade ammonium nitrate to agricultural-grade fertilizer. Engineers adjusted purity levels, redesigned storage systems, and installed safety features for civilian transportation. Companies that had manufactured TNT and other explosives began producing nitrogen compounds for crops. DuPont, for example, quickly transitioned from wartime explosives to synthetic fertilizers. In Germany, the occupying Allied governments repurposed IG's ammonia infrastructure to stabilize food production in a country struggling with extreme shortages. The United States played a leading role in the global shift. With its industrial base intact, America had the capacity to produce more ammonia than the rest of the world combined. The U.S. Department of Agriculture launched programs to promote the use of synthetic fertilizers, educating farmers on application methods and soil chemistry. Agricultural colleges expanded research into nitrogen's effects on wheat, corn, and rice yields. Early post-war crop trials demonstrated astonishing results. Fields treated with nitrogen fertilizer produced harvests 30% to 50% larger than those relying on traditional methods. For countries facing hunger, these increases were nothing short of revolutionary. Other nations quickly followed. In Britain, the Ministry of Agriculture used wartime ammonia plants to restore crop production after years of rationing and submarine blockades. Japan, under Allied occupation, introduced synthetic fertilizers to accelerate agricultural recovery and avoid famine. India and China began importing ammonia-based fertilizers to support growing populations. International agencies warned that without synthetic nitrogen, food shortages would worsen. But with it, the world had a path forward. What had once fueled bombs was now fueling wheat, rice, and corn. By the late 1940s, the transformation was undeniable. The wartime ammonia industry had become the backbone of global agriculture. Governments that once measured success in tons of explosives now measured it in tons of grain. Scientists who had worked on military chemical processes now researched crop nutrition, and farmers around the world, many unaware of the technology's origins, embraced fertilizers that dramatically improved food production. The accidental legacy of wartime chemistry was becoming clear. The infrastructure built for destruction had become the foundation for feeding a planet struggling to recover. As 1946 unfolded, the world confronted a harsh truth. War had ended, but hunger had not. Across Europe and Asia, entire agricultural systems had collapsed, fields neglected or destroyed, livestock lost, and transportation networks shattered. Food shortages were so severe that governments rationed bread, rice, and even potatoes. In Britain, rationing continued well into the 1950s. In Germany, urban populations relied heavily on international aid simply to survive the winter. China, India, and Southeast Asia faced similar crises. Into this fragile landscape entered the large-scale production of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, the very product once created to fill bombs and shells. For millions, it would become a lifeline. Agricultural scientists understood immediately that traditional methods alone could not rebuild food systems quickly enough. Manure, crop rotation, and natural nitrates had sustained humanity for centuries. But the scale of post-war needs was unprecedented. The world population was rising sharply, and decades of conflict had left soil depleted. Synthetic fertilizer, particularly ammonia-based nitrogen, offered something no traditional method could: speed. It could restore nutrients to exhausted land in days rather than years. And because wartime ammonia plants already existed, production did not require building entirely new infrastructure. Governments simply had to repurpose, regulate, and distribute. In the United States, this transformation was rapid and carefully documented. Former ammunition factories in places like Alabama, Tennessee, and Texas were converted into fertilizer production sites with surprising ease. The War Assets Administration auctioned off surplus equipment, allowing private companies to take over ammonia production. DuPont, Allied Chemical, and other corporations became leaders in synthesizing nitrogen fertilizers at industrial scale. Crop yields responded immediately. Throughout the late 1940s, American farmers doubled their use of synthetic fertilizers, and harvest statistics published by the USDA showed dramatic improvements in wheat and corn output. These gains strengthened not only domestic food security, but also global relief efforts. Europe faced a more complicated path. Germany's chemical plants, once controlled by IG Farben, came under Allied supervision. Although some facilities were dismantled, others were maintained and redirected toward agriculture to stabilize the German population. France, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom rebuilt their ammonia infrastructure with American Marshall Plan funding. Reports from 1948 and 1949 highlight how nitrogen fertilizers helped revive European fields that had been barren for years. For countries recovering from occupation and bombardment, synthetic fertilizer was more than a chemical input. It was a symbol of renewal, a tool that allowed farmers to reclaim their land from the ruins. Asia's transformation was equally profound. Japan, under U.S. occupation, relied heavily on imported nitrogen fertilizers to prevent famine between 1946 and 1949. Agricultural surveys from this period showed that rice yields increased sharply due to fertilizer adoption. India and China, facing explosive population growth, began importing ammonia-based fertilizers in huge quantities. The Rockefeller Foundation's early agricultural missions in Mexico and Asia identified nitrogen fertilizer as the single most important factor in preventing mass starvation during the post-war period. Long before the Green Revolution fully emerged, synthetic nitrogen was already laying its foundation. By the end of the 1940s, a remarkable pattern had emerged. A chemical process invented before World War I, expanded during World War II for explosives, was now stabilizing entire nations. Governments, scientists, and farmers recognized that ammonia, once associated with destruction, had become a cornerstone of global food security. The world was not yet producing enough to feed future generations, but the path forward had been revealed. What began as wartime necessity was evolving into one of the most important agricultural transformations in human history. As the 1950s approached, a quiet revolution was taking place across the world, one that had nothing to do with armies or geopolitics, yet would transform humanity more profoundly than many wartime strategies. Nations had begun to realize that synthetic nitrogen fertilizer was not just a useful product. It was a breakthrough capable of preventing famine on a scale that would have once seemed impossible. Ammonia production, once driven by military necessity, was now driven by a new mission: rebuilding the world. SA Foods. Governments published reports emphasizing that fertilizer was no longer optional, it was essential, and farmers, who had endured years of hardship, started witnessing firsthand how dramatically their land could change when nourished with synthetic nitrogen. In the United States, this transition became an economic engine. Thousands of returning veterans turned to farming, aided by GI Bill programs that supported agricultural education. Universities such as Iowa State, Purdue, and Texas A&M launched extensive studies on nitrogen's impact on soil, health, and crop yields. Their findings were astonishingly consistent. Properly applied synthetic fertilizers increased yields far beyond what farmers had considered possible. Cornfields that once produced 30 to 40 bushels per acre now reached 60, 70, or even 100 bushels with nitrogen supplementation. USDA bulletins from the early 1950s celebrated these gains, calling them a new era in American farming. Meanwhile, the chemical industry continued to expand the infrastructure originally built for war. Companies invested in safer reactors, more efficient compressors, and increasingly advanced catalytic materials technologies that had been accelerated by wartime innovation. With peacetime budgets, engineers refined the Haber-Bosch process to reduce energy consumption and increase output. Ammonia pipelines were constructed to transport fertilizer across long distances, linking production centers to agricultural regions. The United States soon became the world's largest producer and exporter of synthetic nitrogen, supporting not only its own farms, but also nations struggling with food shortages. Across Europe, fertilizer was central to recovery efforts. Countries that had suffered massive destruction now relied on ammonia-based fertilizers to rejuvenate depleted fields. The Marshall Plan helped fund new fertilizer factories and restore damaged infrastructure. By the mid-1950s, European crop yields had risen far above pre-war levels. France increased wheat production by more than 50%. The Netherlands rebuilt its dairy and potato industries using synthetic fertilizer to restore soil fertility. Even nations with minimal industrial capacity before the war, such as Italy and Greece, saw rapid agricultural improvement thanks to imported nitrogen. Fertilizer was not merely a product, it was a tool for rebuilding societies. Asia experienced an even more dramatic transformation. In Japan, rice yields increased steadily as ammonia-based fertilizers became widely available. Agricultural census data from 1952 to 1956 showed consistent improvements in productivity, helping stabilize the nation during its fragile post-occupation years. China and India, facing rapidly growing populations, began integrating synthetic fertilizers into large-scale agricultural programs. The Rockefeller Foundation's early work in Mexico, which later inspired the Green Revolution, identified nitrogen fertilizer as a keystone technology for increasing crop yields. In essence, the world had begun to unlock a new agricultural equation. Nitrogen meant food, and food meant stability. By the end of the decade, economists and scientists realized they were witnessing one of the most important technological shifts in human history. The ammonia plants, originally built for war, had become instruments of peace. The synthetic fertilizers they produced were feeding millions, preventing famines, and enabling nations to rebuild their economies with confidence. What had once been part of the machinery of destruction had transformed into the backbone of modern agriculture. The global population was rising faster than ever, but thanks to nitrogen, humanity now had the means to meet the challenge. By the early 1960s, something extraordinary had become undeniable. The world was producing more food than at any time in human history, and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer was at the center of this transformation. What began as a wartime strategy had become the foundation of a new scientific field, modern agronomy. Researchers no longer saw nitrogen as merely a chemical input. They viewed it as a tool that could reshape global food systems. Universities across the United States, Canada, Europe, and Asia launched agricultural research programs focused on soil chemistry, plant physiology, and nutrient cycles. The origins of these programs traced directly back to the infrastructure and expertise developed during World War II. One of the most influential voices in this emerging field was the agronomist Norman Borlaug, who later became known as the father of the Green Revolution. Borlaug's early work in Mexico demonstrated that hybrid wheat varieties combined with synthetic nitrogen could produce yields previously considered impossible. Reports from these experiments revealed staggering results. Nitrogen-fertilized wheat fields produced 2 to 3 times more grain than traditional fields. These outcomes caught the attention of agricultural ministries worldwide. Nations that had long struggled with food shortages suddenly had a scientifically proven path toward food security, and at the center of that path was ammonia derived from the Haber-Bosch process. Governments recognized the potential and began issuing large-scale agricultural development plans. In the United States, the USDA published detailed guidelines for nitrogen use on corn, wheat, cotton, and rice. Europe followed with its own national agricultural expansion programs. Asian nations, facing rapidly growing populations, embraced synthetic fertilizers as a matter of survival. Japan's Ministry of Agriculture emphasized nitrogen's role in stabilizing rice production. India's agricultural universities began research, partnerships with international organizations to improve fertilizer distribution in rural regions. Everywhere, scientists and policymakers sought to understand the same question: how far could nitrogen technology go in preventing famine? The results were dramatic and measurable. Global cereal production increased by nearly 50% between 1950 and 1970, a surge directly linked to the adoption of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Agricultural journals published decade-by-decade comparisons, showing transformations that earlier generations would have considered miraculous. Nations that once relied heavily on food imports began producing enough grain to feed their populations. In Mexico, wheat imports dropped significantly as nitrogen-fertilized crops flourished. In India, rice and wheat yields improved so quickly that fears of mass famine receded. In Europe, farmers rebuilt livestock herds and dairy production thanks to improved pasture yields fueled by nitrogen-based fertilizers. Behind the scenes, industrial chemists continued refining ammonia production. The energy-intensive nature of the Haber-Bosch process led researchers to develop more efficient catalysts and better recycling systems. Countries with access to natural gassing, including the United States, the Netherlands, and the Soviet Union, invested heavily in modern fertilizer plants, further reducing costs and expanding supply. What had once required enormous wartime budgets could now be achieved more economically at industrial scale. This made nitrogen fertilizer accessible not only to wealthy nations, but increasingly to developing countries as well. By the end of the 1960s, one fact had become clear. Humanity had entered a new era, one made possible by a wartime invention repurposed for peace. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer fed nations, stabilized economies, and changed the trajectory of global population growth. The transformation was not accidental. It was the direct result of decisions made in the aftermath of World War II to convert instruments of destruction into tools for survival. And as scientists looked toward the future, they recognized that this chemical legacy would continue shaping the world for generations to come. By the early 1970s, ammonia-based fertilizers were no longer considered advanced technology. They had become a global standard. Yet only a few decades earlier, the Haber-Bosch process had been so strategically important that governments classified it as sensitive wartime information. It had powered ammunition factories, supplied explosives, and determined military capacity on both Allied and Axis sides. Now, however, that once secret industrial chemistry was being openly taught in university classrooms around the world. Nations from Latin America to Southeast Asia were adopting ammonia fertilizers to stabilize and expand their agricultural systems. The wartime invention had completed its transformation into a civilian cornerstone of global food security. Latin America provides one of the most compelling examples of this shift. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, countries like Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina invested heavily in nitrogen-based fertilizers to boost grain and livestock production. Brazil's agricultural expansion in the Cerrado, Regina, vast savanna, once considered unsuitable for farming, was made possible through the combination of soil correction, liming, and nitrogen fertilizers. Government archives document how synthetic ammonia played a crucial role in converting acidic soils into productive farmland. Mexico, benefiting from early Green Revolution research, used nitrogen to transform itself from a grain importer into a self-sustaining agricultural power. Argentina adopted similar practices to support wheat and cattle industries. In AHK's ammonia was at the center of the modernization effort. Africa's agricultural evolution also reflected the global impact of nitrogen fertilizers. Many nations on the continent struggled with soil nutrient depletion and inconsistent rainfall. International development agencies, including the FAO and the World Bank, promoted the adoption of synthetic fertilizers to increase yields and stabilize food supply. In countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ghana, government-supported fertilizer programs helped farmers improve maize and sorghum production. While progress varied from region to region, research consistently showed that access to nitrogen fertilizer dramatically increased yields in areas previously limited by nutrient-poor soils. Ammonia-based fertilizers became a tool not only for food production but also for economic development and rural stability. Meanwhile, industrial capacity continued expanding worldwide. The Soviet Union became one of the largest producers of ammonia, leveraging its extensive natural gas reserves. Newly industrialized nations in East Asia, South Korea, Taiwan, and later China built modern Haber-Bosch facilities to support their emerging agricultural sectors. By the mid-1970s, the production of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers had become truly global, with factories operating on every inhabited continent. The infrastructure originally created for wartime explosives had evolved into a worldwide network of agricultural supply chains, delivering fertilizer from chemical complexes to farms thousands of miles away. The rise of ammonia-based fertilizers also changed scientific research priorities. Agronomists shifted their focus to understanding how nitrogen interacted with different soil types, climates, and crop varieties. Universities in the United States, Europe, and Asia established large-scale field trials to measure fertilizer efficiency and optimize application methods. Government agencies emphasized soil testing and nutrient management to prevent waste and maximize crop performance. Across the world, farmers gained access to new knowledge that helped them use nitrogen more effectively. In regions where these methods were adopted, yields increased dramatically, further reinforcing the value of ammonia-based fertilizers. By the end of the decade, a remarkable reality had emerged. The chemical process once used to supply wartime explosives had become indispensable to feeding billions of people. Nitrogen fertilizer was no longer simply a product, it was a global system. From American cornfields to Indian rice paddies, Brazilian soybean farms to Dutch dairy pastures, ammonia had become the unseen force powering modern agriculture. What began as a wartime necessity now underpinned the most important human activity of all: growing food. By the late 1970s, researchers around the world began to connect the dots between the wartime expansion of ammonia production and the agricultural explosion known as the Green Revolution. Although the public often credited new crop varieties for the dramatic rise in food output, agricultural historians and economists pointed to an equally essential factor: synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Without it, high-yield crops could not reach their potential. Wheat or rice bred to produce 3 times more grain would quickly exhaust the soil unless nitrogen was supplied in equally high quantities. What few people realized was that this nitrogen came directly from industrial infrastructure built, expanded, and perfected during World War II. Norman Borlaug himself emphasized this connection in interviews and reports. He argued that new seeds were only half the solution. Fertilizers were the other half. His teams in Mexico, India, and Pakistan documented that yields increased only when farmers had access to ammonia-based nitrogen. Data collected by global agricultural organizations confirmed this. Countries that adopted synthetic fertilizers saw sudden, rapid rises in food production, while those without access struggled to keep up. By the time the Green Revolution reached Southeast Asia, nitrogen fertilizer had become as essential as irrigation or mechanization. It was the silent partner behind every thriving field. Industrial nations recognized this dependency and expanded their fertilizer industries even further. The United States constructed large ammonia export terminals to ship fertilizers worldwide. The Netherlands became a major producer despite its small size, using natural gas reserves from the Groningen field. Japan, which relied heavily on imports before the war, built modern ammonia plants during its post-war modernization and became a regional supplier. In the Soviet Union, vast chemical complexes in Siberia and Central Asia produced millions of tons of fertilizer each year. The global map of ammonia production, once tied to military strategy, was now tied to agricultural demand. Developing nations saw equally transformative effects. India's agricultural revolution, often described as one of the most important economic shifts of the 20th century, relied heavily on nitrogen fertilizers. Government policy focused on building domestic ammonia plants and ensuring that farmers, especially smallholder farmers, access synthetic fertilizer at affordable prices. Similar developments occurred in Pakistan, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Studies published by the FAO showed that nitrogen was the single largest driver of yield improvement in every region where the Green Revolution took hold. Food production soared, life expectancy increased, and child mortality declined, all linked directly to improved nutrition. International aid programs further accelerated this trend. The World Bank and the United Nations funded fertilizer distribution networks, storage systems, and training programs to teach farmers how to use nitrogen efficiently. In Africa, where soil nutrient depletion was widespread, experts introduced nitrogen fertilizers to support maize, sorghum, and millet production. Although adoption varied from country to country, the benefits were clear wherever nitrogen was consistently available. Economists later documented that synthetic fertilizer played a crucial role in reducing global hunger during the 20th century, preventing food crises that once seemed inevitable. By the end of the 1970s, the connection between wartime chemistry and modern agriculture had become unmistakable. The ammonia industry, born from explosive demand during World War II, had turned into the foundation of global food systems. Synthetic nitrogen had become so deeply integrated into farming that most people never questioned where it came from or how it originated. Yet behind every harvest, every shipment of grain, and every meal on a table anywhere in the world was a chemical process. First developed in Germany and expanded under the pressures of global conflict. The legacy was profound. A wartime invention repurposed for peace had become the engine that fed billions. By the 1980s, it had become clear that the world had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer was now essential to the survival of billions. Demographers began publishing studies showing that without ammonia-based fertilizers, the Earth could not sustain its rapidly growing population. Modern food systems, from vast mechanized farms in North America to small terraced fields in Asia, all relied on the Haber-Bosch process. Historians and agricultural experts traced this dependency back to the wartime expansion of ammonia production during World War II. What had once fueled military industries had become the foundation of global agriculture. Scientific journals published throughout the decade emphasized this dependency with startling clarity. Research has estimated that synthetic nitrogen accounted for nearly half of all protein consumed worldwide. In plain terms, that meant that every second human alive depended, in some way, on nitrogen that originated from a wartime chemical process. The conclusion was both astonishing and humbling. Without the industrial capacity built for World War II explosives, countless lives would have been lost not because of war, but because of famine. Instead, the same chemical infrastructure now supported global nutrition, life expectancy, and economic stability. The fertilizer industry continued to evolve, becoming more efficient and more integrated into the global economy. In the United States, large ammonia pipelines transported nitrogen from Gulf Coast production sites to agricultural regions across the Midwest. Europe optimized its chemical plants, using advanced catalysts and new energy-saving technologies. Japan and South Korea expanded their fertilizer exports, while China dramatically increased domestic ammonia production to support its agricultural reforms. Even the Soviet Union, despite internal economic struggles, remained one of the world's largest producers of synthetic nitrogen. By the end of the 1980s, ammonia production had become one of the most globally interconnected industries on the planet. At the same time, environmental scientists began raising important questions about the long-term effects of nitrogen fertilizer. While synthetic nitrogen was essential for global food production, its widespread use introduced challenges. Runoff into rivers, soil nutrient imbalances, and concerns over water quality. Governments responded by funding research into more efficient fertilizer application techniques. Programs promoting soil testing, controlled release fertilizers, and precision agriculture emerged as tools to reduce waste and environmental impact. These efforts reflected a new phase in the legacy of wartime, focused not only on producing food, but on doing so responsibly. International cooperation expanded as well. Organizations such as the FAO and the World Bank continued to help developing nations establish stable fertilizer supply chains. Scientists from multiple countries shared data on crop responses, soil conditions, and nitrogen efficiency. The old division between producers and users of ammonia began to fade, replaced by a global network of researchers, agronomists, and policymakers focused on sustaining food production for future generations. This collaboration underscored the extraordinary transformation of a technology originally created for conflict into a tool for peace and cooperation. By the end of the decade, the story of ammonia had become one of the most remarkable turns in modern history. A process once guarded as a military asset had become the backbone of the world's food supply. Billions depended on it knowingly or not. And as the 20th century approached its close, scientists, farmers, and historians alike recognized a profound truth. The nitrogen fixed during World War II had not only reshaped agriculture, it had reshaped humanity's future. The world was still grappling with the consequences. Yet it was undeniable that without this wartime innovation, global civilization would look very different and far more fragile. By the dawn of the 1990s, the scale of humanity's dependence on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer was fully understood. Economists, historians, and agricultural scientists all agreed on one extraordinary reality. The world had undergone the largest and fastest transformation in food production in human history, and none of it would have been possible without a chemical process born decades earlier in Germany and massively expanded during World War II. What had once been designed to support munitions factories had become the quiet force sustaining global civilization. The ammonia reactors built to fuel conflict had ultimately become engines of life. Historical analyses traced this legacy with precision. The United Nations estimated that global food production had more than tripled since 1950, with synthetic nitrogen identified as the single most important driver. Half of all the protein consumed worldwide came from crops grown with nitrogen that billions of people were alive because of the Haber-Bosch process. In scientific terms, humanity had changed the nitrogen cycle of the planet. In historical terms, it had avoided catastrophic famines that earlier generations believed were inevitable. All of this stemmed from a technology that wartime governments once viewed solely as a strategic military asset. As global awareness grew, countries made long-term plans to manage and improve their fertilizer industries. The United States continued to modernize its ammonia production facilities, integrating new methods to reduce energy consumption. Europe pioneered efficiency guidelines and environmental protections to limit nutrient runoff. Japan and South Korea refined precision farming techniques that allowed farmers to apply nitrogen with remarkable accuracy. China expanded domestic production, allowing the nation to sustain its rapid agricultural growth and support hundreds of millions of people transitioning out of poverty. Each country's approach differed, but all recognized the same truth. Nitrogen fertilizer was essential infrastructure. Environmental discussions also became part of the global conversation. Scientists acknowledged the challenges associated with nitrogen use: water pollution, soil imbalance, and greenhouse gas emissions, but emphasized that the solution was not abandonment, but innovation. Controlled release fertilizers, improved soil testing programs, and precision agriculture technologies emerged as tools for creating a more sustainable nitrogen future. International conferences brought together agronomists, chemists, and environmental researchers to collaborate on new approaches. What began as wartime chemistry had now evolved into one of the most important environmental sciences of the late 20th century. Despite the ongoing challenges, one theme stood above all others. Synthetic nitrogen had prevented more human suffering than almost any invention in modern history. Countries once plagued by chronic famine, India, China, Mexico, Pakistan, had become far more stable and productive. Life expectancy increased, child mortality decreased, and societies grew more resilient. The fertilizer industry did not just feed people. It allowed nations to develop schools, hospitals, transportation networks, and industries that depended on a stable, well-nourished population. The peaceful legacy of wartime ammonia was not simply agricultural, it was by the end of the century, historians viewed the transformation with a mixture of awe and humility. The world had taken a chemical technology designed for conflict and repurposed it for the greatest humanitarian benefit imaginable. Without the ammonia plants expanded during World War II, modern agriculture could not have fed billions. Without synthetic nitrogen, today's global population would be a fraction of its size. The story of this wartime invention was no longer about bombs or factories. It was about the quiet, ongoing miracle of feeding humanity. And as the future unfolded, one truth became clear. The legacy of World War II chemistry was not destruction, but survival.